but this is the other What If Altist live stream, and we're operating this off Pearl, and it's great that you folks can hear me. And we're just going to talk for 45 minutes until 12:50 EST about the topics that we normally talk about in What If Altist. And I have Iron Channel, which is my right-hand man, who helps manage my YouTube channel here as well as Matt, the CEO of Pearl. But I'm excited. So what topics would you like me to talk about? I have a couple that I want to go through, but also I'm just leave some comments and I'll come to the ones that seem the best. And then later on, we're going to bring some folks on the stage. And with that, we'll be able to we can hear about your interesting questions. And the world famine is something that I think is very pertinent to modern politics, because I released a video a couple weeks ago, and the video is done very well, and it's called "The World as We Understand It Will End Very Soon." That's not the exact title, but it's something along those lines. And what I said is that a series of factors that the secular cycle that I often talk about will result in a collapse in the global order over the next year. And the biggest driving factor behind it is the global food crisis, because a large part of the world, especially Africa and the Middle East, are incredibly food dependent. And because of that, they basically, if they can't get their food supply, everyone starves. And on top of that, modern agriculture can have such high outputs because it's based off fertilizer. And this fertilizer comes from a handful of different countries. And this is why, for example, Africa's population can go up by a factor of 5 since 1950. And all those Africans are significantly better fed just because we've seen these massive agricultural advances. However, the entirety of the modern economy is predicated upon these massive interconnections that can fall apart. And with the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the thing that worried myself and many other thinkers like Peter Zeihan is that Russia and Ukraine are some of the world's biggest grain exporters. And the Middle East and Africa are in a lot of ways completely dependent upon them. And with the other agricultural powers of the world, such as the United States, the Latin countries like Argentina or Brazil, they're having various supply chain issues, which means they could not be able to pick up the slack. But the thing is, and this is something that's very profound, Russia and Ukraine just signed a treaty saying that they will export grain to the rest of the world. And that's something I said in the video, where I said that it seems extremely likely that I didn't say it was extremely likely. I said it was definitely within the range of possibility that they'd hash up some kind of solution, because the fundamental truth is people really don't want to starve. And it's inside no one's self-interest to have Africa and the Middle East collapse into Mad Max style failed states. So I thought it would be something more along the lines of the war ending and then people exporting grain, but something else happened where they signed a treaty to do so. And we really don't know if that treaty will be effective, because the world's just too complicated. And whenever you deal with low trust areas of factions that hate each other, you should in many ways assume that treaties won't go through. But it's inside no one's self-interest to see hundreds of millions starve, as would be the case in a global famine. And so I could see this going through, but the fundamental truth is that and so we might not see a collapse of the world over the next year. And actually, I'm going to make a video in about a month, and I'm going to wait a month to see what's going to happen over that next month, called Why the World Might Not End This Year. And I do that because I want to be intellectually honest, and I want to be honest with my followers and be like, hey, I'm just working off my best information. The information has changed. So, and you really got to talk about the good news and the bad news. And if there's good news, you should honor it. So since you can't think the world just totally sucks. But with Ukraine and Russia continuing to export grain, I think this is a short-term improvement where all of the fundamental conditions that resulted in there being a strong possibility there would be a global famine are still there. And the world order is still in a fundamentally tight place, in a very scary place. And if you look at Ukraine, China, Russia, that whole region, they're experiencing massive aging. Like in a couple years, like by 2040 or 2035, there will be 2 elderly Russians for every working Russian. And that's the case across that whole Eurasian plain, from Germany out to Korea. And that's just a situation where no society can survive. And so if you're seeing that massive agricultural powerhouse almost certainly about to um, about if you're seeing all of these problems that mean Russia and Ukraine will collapse as societies in the next 10 years, it means that Africa and the Middle East are fated to starve unless they can massively improve their supply chains and agricultural productivity, which is basically impossible because that sort of thing takes decades. It takes decades to establish a strong agricultural industry. And so I think that we're still going to see the famine, but yet at the same time, there will be. But I think that we can put it off by a couple of years. I think that if the famine were to happen, it would mean that the financial crash would. The two are inextricably linked, as you would realize if you watch that video. And because of that, because of that, there is, if we have a financial crash, you'll see economic crises across the region, which will create a famine situation as well. And if the food problem happens later, it means we have more time before there could be a potential financial crash. And so at the same time, though, I do think the financial crash would occur within the next year. And I say that because if you look at the Chinese economy, the Chinese are in such desperate straits. They would not be acting in the manner they are unless they were very, very worried. And so, yeah, that's what I think.
Americans impact the world in ways they often don't even realize, reaching across the planet and shaping whole regions without even knowing. Some of the greatest impacts made by the US, direct or otherwise, can be seen in this documentary series, Great Decisions, which covers an area from the Middle East to Korea, and shows how US intervention shapes their future. This series talks about the Kurds, Koreans, ISIS, and more. And while it's not about America directly, it certainly shows America's role in these events. As many of you might have guessed, I was able to watch this series with Magellan TV, an online documentary streaming service made by filmmakers with the best selection of historical documentaries and movies out there. They have content covering everything from the ocean to outer space, and from biography to current events. Magellan's compatible just about any device and is 4K HD with no additional cost. It's a great platform for a very affordable price. Regardless of what your interests are, Magellan TV is something for you, and right now they're offering a 30-day free trial to anyone who uses the link in the description, so check out Magellan TV today.
I'd like you to take this for a minute until I can fix this.
All right. How's it going, everybody? What do we have here for questions?
You should pick a couple out and roll through them. The China one's interesting.
Okay, well, we have one. Will America's current recession economically drag down the rest of the world, like what happened with the Great Depression? That's a little complicated of a question, but I think that phrasing that the economic recession in America is going to affect the rest of the world is kind of backwards. I think that Sri Lanka has kind of collapsed all on its own, and China is probably going to fall apart on its own, not really due to factors going on in America right now, and those things will make the American economy collapse. So I actually think that Eurasia falling apart is going to lead to America. Well, I should say Asia falling apart is going to lead to America falling apart economically, and then Europe followed after that. So I don't think America's recession will cause further collapse. I think America's recession is indicative of the collapse that's already going across Asia right now. Brian asks, will China eventually become a democracy, or will China's authoritarian meritocracy become an alternative to democracy for the world? That's a good one. So the thing about China is they have no real experience with democracy up to this point. So there's nothing to indicate that they would become a democratic nation. However, countries such as Korea or Vietnam, I should say South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, have all done experiments with democracy. And currently, I mean, Taiwan and South Korea and Japan have all become pretty successful democratic nations. So I think that it's not outside of the realm of possibility that China could pick up democracy and make it work. However, China has a very deeply ingrained culture that makes them, that they've been working off of for so long, whereas Korea and Japan have been more orbital states. China has been the central state that everybody else is kind of copying. So it's entirely possible that China will double down on themselves. And on top of that, China just has so many people. I don't know how well you could get a democracy to work with 1 billion people in a country. There'd just be so many different interests going on. I think it's more likely they'll keep the authoritarian meritocracy than moving on to a democratic country, but I don't think it's impossible. All right, what else do we have?
An interesting video that I'm working on right now, and I'll just tell you guys the videos that we're doing, one of which is I'm making a video of the 9 nations of North America, where this journalist in 1980 wrote a book called The 9 Nations of North America, which broke America into a series of separate divisions, such as the Rust Belt, the Great Plains, the South, the Mexican borderlands, and each of them, he said, had its own culture, its own geography, its own economy, etc. And because of that, and he drove around and showed how these places work, but it was very localized in that one era of history. And I'm making a video talking about the regional and ethnic origins of the separate subcultures in America. And I've just finished it and I'm very excited about it. I haven't made these videos yet, but I think topics that are very interesting to consider are, I'm going to go back and redo my what would an American Civil War be like, and a modern one between the right and the left. And the reason I'm saying that is a lot's happened since I released that video, and it's also one of the most viewed videos of all time, and I made it when I was a much less good channel in a lot of ways. And so I'm really fascinated by basically reconsidering that topic. And it's one of the interesting things to look at is how much political polarization has affected, has changed over time. Because if you even look at the political platforms, as they've existed between 5 years ago and the current, you see large changes. Okay, what other questions do you all have? There's a couple different places where I think there are chances of doing different civilizations, where one of them is I think a new one could develop around Ukraine, because Orthodox civilization in many ways has had its soul ripped out by the rise of communism, which destroyed its religion. And religion is fundamentally the core around which a civilization forms, where its ideas of the world and its worldview, as Spengler would say, is predicated upon religion. It's predicated upon the worldview that is posited by religion. And with the Orthodox world being one of those atheist places in the world, there isn't really that impetus. And so I think also civilizations form from eras of conflict, and the Orthodox world is squeezed with a growing Islam on another side. And so I could see a new civilization forming in the heartland south of the old Russian area, where it's a new settler region. And because new civilizations form in frontier regions that don't have all the cultural baggage of the older ones, I think the Anglo-Saxon world will become a new civilization as it splits more and more off from what Europe's doing. I think they'll both be Western, but like the Eastern and Western Roman empires, they'll gradually go off in different directions. And the Anglo-Saxon civilization it'll colonize space, which gives itself its own character. And we're at the point where the Anglo-Saxon countries have like a third the population, or half the population is continental Europe if you exclude Russia. Or more than that, damn. There's a lot of people in that social group. I think China will probably get a messianic cult at some point in this century, and there's a decent chance that said messianic cult will said messianic cult will take China in a totally different direction, because as of now, you see a total religious and spiritual vacuum in China where no one knows what to believe in. And I think it'll, like the Taipings, it'll pull upon the previous precedent of Chinese civilization, but it
Americans impact the world in ways they often don't even realize, reaching across the planet and shaping whole regions without even knowing. Some of the greatest impacts made by the US, direct or otherwise, can be seen in this documentary series, Great Decisions, which covers an area from the Middle East to Korea, and shows how US intervention shapes their future. This series talks about the Kurds, Koreans, ISIS, and more. And while it's not about America directly, it certainly shows America's role in these events. As many of you might have guessed, I was able to watch this series with Magellan TV, an online documentary streaming service made by filmmakers with the best selection of historical documentaries and movies out there. They have content covering everything from the ocean to outer space, and from biography to current events. Magellan's compatible just about any device and is 4K HD with no additional cost. It's a great platform for a very affordable price. Regardless of what your interests are, Magellan TV is something for you, and right now they're offering a 30-day free trial to anyone who uses the link in the description, so check out Magellan TV today.
Oh, cool.
why don't you bring Kami onto the stage and just take a couple questions? Or like bring people onto the stage.
All right, yeah.